Assalamu alaikum guys, so we're going to do another reaction video, and this video is of Richard Dawkins. Now, one of the guys in the comments brought this up, and I think this is the video where he refers to or makes the statement that, Jesus should have been an atheist, being so intelligent, or something along those lines. I've briefly gone through the video, and I think it's a brilliant video because we can really learn a lot from this as far as his views are concerned and how inaccurate they are. And we can also take this as an opportunity to correct these false notions, inshallah. So without further ado, let's play this and I'll give you my thoughts on it as we go along, inshallah.
Yes. Richard Dawkins, you've talked a lot in terms of religion being a pernicious virus. When you talk in those sort of emotional, quite visceral terms, are you doing that to sort of raise hackles and therefore heighten the debate, do you think?
I don't think I've talked a lot about it being pernicious. I'm not even sure I ever used the word pernicious.
But virus is the word you
certainly virus. And the point there is really not the pernicious aspect, although I actually think it is pernicious. The point there is that it's infectious. It's something that grips the mind in the same way as a virus, a conventional virus, grips the body, in that it takes control, and it does so the better to propagate itself.
But in choosing words like that,
so just some thoughts on this specific point. He considers religion to be like a virus, quite a negative way of looking at it. But I guess the idea here that he's trying to suggest is that religions capture people. You know, the religious outlook is something that is appealing to people. Now, this is very interesting, the fact that he's acknowledging this. Obviously, this is a problem for him because he considers religion to be a negative thing based on some really terrible assumptions and baseless assumptions. But that being said, this idea that religion captivates people, it captures people, is very interesting. And from an Islamic perspective, what we can link this to is the idea that, or the understanding that, well, if God is the one that created the human being, then God is the one that knows the human being better than anyone or anything else, better than the human knows itself. And in Islam, we know God has given us this religion of Islam. He has given us revelation because it's guidance, it's benefit. It's there to benefit us as human beings. And the fact that it's from God, you know, means that it's going to be in line with our nature. And it is. When you read the Quran, when you study Islam, you realize very quickly that this religion, this way of life is calling you to what's natural. It's calling you to what's intuitive, what makes sense. It's calling you to discover your purpose, to live a good life, to live an ethical life. It provides the grounding for morals and ethics and meaning. Things we are hungry for as human beings. We drive, we desire, we are looking for, especially in the world that we live in today. A world without God, a world, therefore, which cannot ground morals or ethics or meaning in any significant way. So, of course, religion is going to make sense. It's going to be appealing. As Dawkins would say, it's something that it's like a virus. I don't like using that specific word because obviously viruses are something bad. There's something negative, generally speaking. And that's the association that he's trying to make here. But just some thoughts in regards to that. If anything, that's an interesting point to ponder upon. You know, why are religions, generally speaking, you know, ways of life which are appealing to people, firstly? And secondly, we know that Islam is growing. People are accepting Islam all across the world. It's trending, if you like. There must be a reason to this. You know, if all of these things you say, these atheists, especially Richard Dawkins, say are true, that, oh, religion is bad, it's evil, it's this, that, and the other, well, why are people turning towards religion today? You know, we live in the most, according to many, the most civilized world that's ever existed. You know, we live in a time where people have everything from a material perspective. Technology, you know, everything. It's all progress. It's all progress. It's all moving forward. Yet people are turning to religion. Yet people are coming to Islam in particular. Well, there must be something there.
On occasion, I've read that you've said you despise organised religion, or religious belief, actually. they're very emotive terms for someone from an academic background.
That's
Are
a
you
good point.
doing that because you feel it's in the interests of the cause that you're pursuing? That debate is quite highly charged.
I wonder if they're as emotive as you think they are. I suspect that because we've all been brought up with this sort of culture of respecting religion, that anything comparatively mild sounds more outspoken than it really is. I mean, do you really despise religious belief? I despise people who believe something without evidence and then go out and take action which damages other people. Yeah.
Yeah. So there are several issues with what you said there. I think that was a good point made by the interviewer, which is, that for being an academic, a scientist, he's very emotive when it comes to these things. And this is a very important point to appreciate and understand that, look, Richard Dawkins is a biologist, or he was a biologist. Many would consider him to be, in his later life, more of a reporter of science. Now, that being the case, to speak in such terms, with such emotion, without evidence. Now you see him talking about evidence, people believing things without evidence, and then go do some atrocious things. Many of the beliefs he holds, especially in regards to Islam, you can read, I think in one of his more recent books, Outgrowing God, he seems to just brush over Islam or touch upon Islam briefly, but you can see that the guy has no clue when it comes to Islam. He hasn't studied Islam, he hasn't read the texts, yet he makes such definitive claims, not based on evidence. If anything, he's the one that's being emotional, and what we need to appreciate here is that when he is speaking out against God or religion, he is not speaking as a scientist or an academic. This is coming from a different place. Now, obviously, there's probably some underlying reasons as to why he's so emotionally against the idea of religion and he's so charged, but that's a separate point. The point is that a lot of times when you hear someone that has a degree or a PhD or is a professor, and you hear them talking about topics which they don't specialize in, people tend to take them seriously. So just because he is a PhD in one thing, therefore he now has the license to speak about everything and he is an expert in everything. And this is simply not the case, which is evident through Dawkins himself.
Yes. So I despise people whose belief in religion is so firm and so unshakable that they actually think it justifies killing people.
Yeah.
Right, of course, many people like
But
that.
your average...
So again, this is a generalization, more of a blanket statement that he's just trying to paint a picture here that religions result in violence and bloodshed. This is simply not the case when you look at the data, you look at the statistics. There is a very interesting book which I referred to in the past. It's called War and Peace in Islam. The author does a tally of different groups, philosophies, ideologies which have led to bloodshed throughout history. And what he highlights is that, as far as if my memory serves me well, the second on the list was the anti-theists, those that don't believe in religion, don't adopt a theistic worldview. So, sure, human beings, there have been elements of any and every group that have done some atrocious things throughout history. No doubt, no one's denying this fact. And there are still, small groups of people or individuals that are literally cracked and in the name of religion do some atrocious things within Islam as well, no doubt. But there is no monopoly here. You will find the same amongst atheists and anti-theists. The Soviet Union was a brutal example of an irreligious ideology implemented on a state level, which resulted in just massacre, literally. So, again, these are sound bites that he puts out there to paint a particular narrative or a picture.
Average devout worshipper who's sitting in a pew of a Sunday morning, you don't despise them.
No, of course I don't. No.
What are your feelings towards them?
Well, I mean, they're harmless, especially Church of England. I mean, they're harmless. I don't have strong feelings one way or the other. No, of course I don't despise them.
Here's the thing. I am an agnostic.
He seems offended.
I have thought about the tenets, certainly, of Christian belief. And as far as believing in God is concerned, sort of found them wanting, or myself unable to be convinced. But I still think that I can't possibly know whether God exists or not anymore. I mean, am I being sort of, what's the word? Oh, you know, we
See, this is a good point, and I think it's a fair point. I don't think atheism, the type that's demonstrated by Dawkins, is a real thing. I really don't think that. I think it's an emotional position. Because in reality, when you weigh out the evidence and you rationally think about the reality of God, you know, at best, one could say, I'm an agnostic. You know, that I don't have good reasons to believe or deny at the moment. I would say if such a person further inquires about God and religion, and just put that aside, actually, just where they further inquire even within the discipline of science, and they look at what science is showing us today, physics is showing us, biology is showing us, one could make a tangible, rational, reasonable case for the existence of God, a higher power. To be an agnostic, okay, it makes sense. Someone could be an agnostic, but to be an atheist, where you're saying, you know, it's a positive claim that there is no God, there is no creator. Well, that's a big claim. That claim suggests that you are certain that there is no God or a creator. Well, how do you get to such a certainty when you're limited to the physical material world, and you cannot delve beyond it and know therefore what's really there or not there? So this is quite a wild claim.
Weak-willed, guilty of not having the courage of my convictions.
No, I mean I'm an agnostic too in that sense.
Oh, in that sense, he's an agnostic. Okay, so in the real sense, in the honest sense, if you like, in the reasonable sense, Dawkins seems to be an agnostic. But obviously, in an emotional sense, in a public sense, he seems to be an atheist. Well, you know, you can't be both unless you're going to redefine the general definitions of what an atheist is and agnostic is. And I know there's a scope of interpretation or you know, in regards to what these words mean. However, there is a distinction between one calling themselves an agnostic and one calling themselves an atheist. And you can't be both when it suits you.
The God delusion, I made a 7-point scale. And 1 was total conviction that there is a God, and 7 is total conviction that there isn't. And I put myself as a 6. Okay, so that's kind of agnostic, but veering towards atheist. And I would be a 6 with respect to fairies and pixies and werewolves and things like that. But there are people who will say, because...
See, now again, he does the same thing. He makes a point in which he knows, I think, that he may be somewhat contradicting himself and his general position that he's an atheist, there is no God, there are no gods, it's just a silly idea. And then he puts himself on the scale of 6 in his book, where he suggests that he seems to be an agnostic. Realizing that he is walking into a contradiction, he then throws in, again, one of those one-liners. The evidence for God is, or the lack of evidence is the same as fairies and pixies and so on and so forth. Again, this type of common one-liner that's used by many atheists to make a bit of a joke. So you can see he does this. He flips back and forth. When he finds himself in a tricky situation, then to bring himself out of that hole, he throws in one of these silly little comments.
They're agnostic. That puts them absolutely right in the middle. The probability of there being a God and there not being a God is exactly 50-50. And that, I think, is the wrong sort of agnostic to be, because I think you can sort of put a probability figure on it. You can say, well, I think a God is very unlikely, but I can't actually disprove it. So I'm not a 7. I'm a 6.5 or something like that. And that's where I would put myself.
What about the fact that religion, in terms of its institutional influence, persists? How much does that irritate you? Or
it's weird that those countries that have sort of the trappings of theocracy remaining, like Britain, because we have bishops in the House of Lords, and we have lots and lots of faith schools, and we have the Queen is the head of the Church of England. It's an odd thing that those countries, like Britain, like the Scandinavian countries, which have an established church, seem to be the least religious. And a country like America, which has written into its constitution the separation between church and state, a wall of separation, as Jefferson called it, is one of the most religious countries, the most religious country in the Western world. So there's an odd negative correlation with what you might naively expect.
How do you explain that, do you think?
Well, various explanations have been offered. I mean, one explanation is that in a country like Britain, where religion is part of the establishment, it's become sort of boring. Whereas in America, where there's the wall of separation, religion has become free enterprise. And so you have mega churches with their own television stations, their own creches to look after the children, their own gyms. They've become huge commercial enterprises, tax-free, by the way, which helps, with the televangelists having private Lear jets to jet around in and fleets of posh cars and things.
It's not tea and biscuits.
It's a very, very big business, religion in America, whereas in Britain it's become sort of boring and people don't really take it very seriously one way or the other.
Politics is very...
Saying that, I think atheism is a big business for many individuals these days as well. I mean, especially the Four Horsemen. They have, done quite well based on their public atheism. So I think, yeah, it's a valid point. But I think the ball or there's it goes both ways. Atheists too. I think many atheists online, especially these days, are the type of atheists that they are on camera because there is a financial incentive there. Again, it's human nature. Sure, that's a factor. But anyway, I just thought it was an interesting
very reluctant to go anywhere near this
point.
I mean, in terms of the solutions to some of what you're talking about, the only place we can look is to politics. The state has to act. Perhaps things have to be legislated for. And yet, I mean, there was a hell of a fuss when Ed Miliband recently said he was an atheist. There's a sort of, it goes back to what you said before, I think, about not offending religious sensibilities.
Yes.
There's a sort of twitchiness about religion.
I think that's
still.
True. Yeah, I think that is
And then
true.
I suppose my question, given the amount of energy you expend on this issue, how you aim to get over that? Because it does stand in the way
Yes.
of society achieving the sort of shape that someone like you would like it to achieve.
Yes, and my colleague Dan Dennett...
What is that shape, guys, honestly? The shape that society would take if Dawkins' version of atheism and naturalism was to be implemented. Well, we can see the beginnings of that, at least the beginnings of that already. I mean, we can see, if you take a general snapshot of the world that we live in today, especially from the Western perspective, a highly secularized world which doesn't believe in or acknowledge God and religion, which encourages humanity to focus on matter and the physical material world and this life, which suggests that this is the only life that exists and there is nothing beyond that. What has that world resulted in? We can see, for example, the degradation of morals and values and ethics. We can see people lost and confused in regards to the meaning, the ultimate meaning and purpose of life. And therefore we see people breaking down, people suffering, although materially they're doing really well. They are suffering in their own way. What Dawkins' form of atheism does is it destroys civilizations, literally. And we have seen examples of this throughout history. It's when societies, when cultures and civilizations morally and ethically degrade, when they lose their sight or their direction or their meaning and their purpose, and they lose themselves to material luxuries and pleasures, to materialism, that's when they collapse, right? So it's so bizarre that since the Enlightenment, people haven't till date realized and recognized that there is an aspect to human nature which requires spirituality, which requires law and order. Well, they probably have recognized law and order and they try to implement that from a human perspective, but which requires divine law and order, which requires direction, meaning, purpose, things that are beyond material satisfaction. They still haven't recognized this. And that is the fundamental issue. And religion provides exactly that. Islam in particular provides exactly that. So, and this is why I think people have been turning away from Dawkins and inclining more towards people like Jordan Peterson, etc., because at least they try to provide answers to these big questions in the absence of religion, right? And that in itself is appealing. When you're dying of thirst, sure, you'll probably, if you had a cup of urine or a cup of whatever, dirty water, you would drink that, right? So that's what's happening. Anyone that offers anything more than what these hardline naturalists and materialists and atheists have had to offer, people are inclining towards that. But even that's not going to be satisfactory. Even that is not going to be sufficient in the long run. So just some thoughts in regards to this. Hopefully this video was beneficial. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. There's more to go, but I think it's getting long. Inshallah, we can wrap up here. And I will speak to you guys next time. Assalamu alaikum.